Sarah remembers everybody.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 16th TransformGov Talks. Lovely to see so many of you in person and online tonight. I'm Gavin Freegard, Director of State of the Future and one of the organisers of TransformGov Talks. So thank you very much for coming along tonight. Hands up if you've been to TransformGov Talks before. Welcome back. Hands up if this is your first one. Welcome. Hands up if you'd rather be sat outside in the sun with a pint right now. Okay, that was a smaller show of hands than I expected, so thank you very much. A quick introduction to TransformGov Talks for those of you who've not been before. This is a space for people who care about making government work better. The format is very simple. Each event consists of 2 presentations and Q&A on how to do that, bringing different perspectives, projects, all sorts of different thoughts and views on how we might go about doing things differently. We are live streaming and on the record. Good evening to you if you're online. And although this is sort of inspired by things like UK GovCamp and slightly more informal spaces, which have tended to start with data and digital, we've covered much more than that. Data, digital and AI, public involvement, policy design, civil service reform, even a very entertaining history of the National Audit Office. So you can find all of those on our website, and I'll say a bit more about that shortly. Very importantly, for those of you in the room, there is one other bullet point which is very important. There will be free pizza afterwards. So it will appear at the back during the course of the event, and you are very welcome to stay afterwards. So how this is going to work, you're going to see 2 brilliant presentations. Each will be about 25 to 30 minutes. Our speakers will speak or present for a bit. We'll then go into questions and discussion. If you're in the room, you can put your hand up. If you're in the room or online, you can go to Slido. Go to slido.com, and the code is 2554962. I'll flash that up again in a minute as well. We'll finish at around 7. There'll be pizza for those of you in the room, and the pub afterwards will be the Buckingham Arms. So if you're joining us online and you can sprint to the pub afterwards, you're very welcome to join us as well. As I mentioned, this is our 16th event, and that is a gallery of wonderful people who've spoken at previous events. You can find all of the previous ones on transformgov.org.uk. A huge thank you to our sponsors, which make this possible. That's Anmut, Seva, DXW, Holistic Agility, Public Digital, State of the Future, and TPX Impact. If you would like to join that very virtuous lineup as a sponsor, or you'd like to help us organise, or you'd like to come and speak or know someone that should, please do get in touch with us at transformgovtalks@gmail.com, or do speak to one of the organisers afterwards, as well as me. That's Dave, Derek, who's currently swanning around the world thinking about public sector reform. Nice work if you can get it. Jeff, Vijay, Linda and Stuart. And if you'd like to help make our organising committee more diverse, we'd be particularly welcome of your services. This is the bit where you might want to get your phones out. We've got a few QR codes coming out. If you would like to ask questions on Slido, it's slido.com 2554962, or you can scan that QR code. So I will speak slowly for a few seconds to let you all do that. You can see some phones out. How much am I going to have to fill? Not too much, I don't think. Excellent. No pressure. Waiting for one person there on the phone, sorry. But do keep your phones out, because you can also sign up right now for our next event number 17. That's kindly being hosted by one of our sponsors, Public Digital. The speakers will include Caitlin Wakeford from LNER on fancy sketches, how to use AI to prototype quickly, center the user and not get stuck in magical thinking. So that should be a really interesting one. Thursday, the 21st of May, you can sign up now. Now, 2 important things to note about the next event. Thursday, so it is not, as we usually are, on a Wednesday. It is Thursday. And it is not, as we usually are here in Westminster. It's in Holborn. So remember, the next one, Thursday, Holborn, not Wednesday, Westminster. But returning to tonight, we've got 3 brilliant speakers for you. And you'll be very pleased to hear they've all been properly and thoroughly vetted. Too soon. First of all, speaking from the Local Government Association, we've got Lisa Trickey and Rebekah Wilson, who'll be talking about the state of digital local government and LG 2040, the state of things to come. They'll be followed by Jonathan Slater, visiting professor at King's College London and Queen Mary University of London, and formerly of the Civil Service, who'll be talking about civil service reform. So 2 brilliant presentations slash speeches in prospect for you tonight. More than enough from me, so I'm going to hand over to our first speakers.
Thank you. Thanks, Gavin.
And I'm going to give you.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah, good, great. I'm Rebekah Wilson. I work at an organisation called the Local Government Association. Hopefully you've heard of us. If not, I'll tell you a little bit about us in a second. And I'm here with my colleague, Lisa Trickey, as well. I'm the sort of bookends, I think. I'm doing the sort of opening and the closing. So, and you'll get all the kind of meaty stuff in the middle from Lisa. I was actually reflecting with Lisa just before we came here that you agree to these talks and you think that's in the future. That sounds like a good idea. Gets a bit closer and you think, gosh, I better make some time to think about what I'm going to say. But actually, in the process of doing that, when you've made the time, it's actually a really helpful process to think, actually, what is it that we've been working on for the last couple of months and how do we describe that to people and what would they find interesting? So hopefully we've picked out some of the stuff that is actually interesting and you will be interested to hear what we've got to say. So we're going to say a couple of things about digital local government, which is something that we both work on with a team at the LGA. And we're going to talk about some of the kind of early thinking that we're doing on a piece of work, which is a sort of research and engagement piece around local government 2040. Whoops, we're going the wrong way, holding it upside down. Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit more about kind of where we work and kind of what we do, but just a few sort of reflections, really sort of takeaways, which are going to be kind of themes that we've got throughout this presentation. So first one is about the sort of problem of short-term pressures and the problem that causes for sort of long-term planning. Certainly some work that we've been doing where we can see better, well, actually a lot of development in getting better joined up thinking across local and central government. Certainly lots of work we're seeing that data, digital and technology are absolutely essential to that story. Some of the changing landscape around local government and what that means in terms of opportunities for change and reform. And the last bit really is about the future and that, you know, it's ours really to play with. So quick question. I was curious in the room who might work within local government or with local government or be a partner of local government. Oh, good. Okay. Hopefully you've heard of the Local Government Association. We are the national voice of local government. We were set up in 1997, and we do a couple of things that I'm going to tell you about in a second. I'll tell you this first. We get our income from two places. We get it from our membership, so that's pretty much all local government in England, and we've also got some sort of paid add-ons for councils who want to use those services. But we get most of our income from government grants. So we get some of those grants competitively and we get some from the Local Government Act, which means that we can work on behalf of councils and don't have to do that multiple times over. In terms of what we do, we've got kind of three main ways of working. So there's the advocacy that we do, which is essentially to champion local government's role in policy, decisions and resources for communities. There's our improvement work, which we get a lot of our grants for, which is essentially to support councils to improve through partnership working and lots of peer-led collaboration. And then actually a slightly newer strategic goal for us is around innovation and what part might we be able to play in encouraging and accelerating new ideas that strengthen public service excellence. So that's kind of what we do. We support all councils, so that's all at the moment, 317 councils, but we'll get to that, how that landscape is changing. That's across the 9 regions of England. We work across both the county and district two-tier system and all of the unitary authorities too. Thought you might be a bit of a statsy audience, so I've just put in there what the workforce looks like for local government, which is 1.16 million. In England and Wales. That does include the sort of teaching workforce too, and a predominantly female workforce that may represent the fact that a lot of it is care work, a lot of it is low paid, and a lot of it is teaching work too. But that's just a kind of interesting dynamic about local government I thought you might be interested in. In terms of what councils do, this often comes up as bins, potholes, etc. But what I've tried to do here is capture kind of a bit of an A to Z. It used to be an A to Z because I thought zoos were on there, but somehow zoos have dropped off the list. But anyway, it goes from the sort of duties to all the things that councils have statutory responsibilities for. There are lots of them. There are over 5,000. Starts with stuff around schools and education. This particular one is around academies. And goes through to youth support, and these are absolute musts that councils must do. So that's particularly around vulnerable children and their well-being, and supporting young people around those with additional needs. And then lots of things that councils may choose to do. That starts at the top of the list with dealing with abandoned shopping trolleys, and again goes down to discretionary services for young people. Oh, well, Lisa, you're up.
So we just thought we'd start in terms of what does digital mean in local government for councils, and absolutely it's about the drive for productivity. So how do we get our processes as lean as possible, as automated as possible, but also how do we get as much online as we possibly can, designed really well to maximise impact. And that's really down to the significant kind of funding cuts that we've had over the last decade, and a 31.5% reduction in our workforce as a result of that. So really important to be able to make things as efficient as we possibly can. But digital is also about improving outcomes for people, whether that's helping someone to remain independent in their own home using sensor technology to monitor what they're doing and help them should they fall. It's also about using data to intervene early, to use kind of predictions, to see if we can actually catch somebody before they fall deeper into poverty and help support them, or actually through equipping somebody that might have left prison, actually giving them digital skills to help them get a job and, contributing back into society. So there's a wide range of things that we do when it comes to talking and delivering digital in councils. I just thought we'd put up a bit of a landscape slide. So we spend about 3.4 billion on digital and technology contracts in local government. Only 2% of the workforce are in formal DDAT roles. That's compared to about 4% in central government, although we've obviously got this 10% target in the blueprint. We've got a range of 2 to 200 people that might be in a DDAT function. So you can see in there that the size of teams, varies significantly across councils, and therefore the digital maturity of councils do as well. And there are hundreds of pieces of software in a council, and you're dealing with about 70-90 critical systems in a county or unitary council. And so that, they'll be supporting the 800 services that Rebekah mentioned, but the critical systems are things like your social care systems, planning, revs and bends, those kind of things. And of course, in local government, we're responding to central government policy, and we've seen a lot of digital policy come out in the last year, more than I can ever remember, whether that's AI, digital inclusion, the cyber action plan. And we've had the State of Digital Government review, which was great to see. And it was the first time we've seen a really cross-cutting policy that mentions local government many times, and it's obviously informed the ambition of the blueprint, which really talks about how do we join up public services around the individual. So we had the opportunity to comment on that, and we also then produced our own response, really. And this was to, our attempt really to kind of assess and influence the future of digital transformation in English local government. And when we did that piece of work, we identified 4 key challenges for the sector. So firstly, skills and capability. We have challenges with recruitment and retention. About 18% of technical roles remain vacant across the sector, so that's kind of really challenging. We suffer market concentration and supplier dominance, and that's led to challenges around integration and access to data, high cost of change. That compounds our technical legacy. And I think, Matt, you talked a couple of sessions ago about some of the interventions that you can do in central government to tackle some of those things. We see fragmented and constrained service delivery. So, that lack of integration then leads to silo approaches. And although the sector actually has been at the forefront of AI experimentation, scaling that innovation across the sector is actually really challenging. So in terms of the support that we provide from the LGA to councils to kind of try and intervene and kind of improve maturity across the sector, we've got active networks where we bring people together around different topics, whether that's AI or cyber, or in the moment of government reorganisation. Where councils share their learning and we bring in expert speakers. We actually go in and we provide with people from across the sector a peer review where we spend time with a council, and whether that's on data or cyber or digital, and identify how they can perhaps improve. From an innovation perspective, we facilitated the pilot of the government AI incubator Minute Tool with 40 councils across the sector, and helped share that learning and made recommendations around that. And we provide resources, and some of the resources you might be interested in, they're probably transferable to a degree, is our cyber grab bag. What should you do if you experience a cyber attack? And our guide for responsible buying of AI, so you might want to check those out. And again, we do various training and events to help develop digital leadership skills and knowledge and awareness. In terms of what's changing, the 2024 kind of devolution white paper, it does bring about the biggest structural change that we've seen, in the sector for decades. It's devolving powers through the creation of new strategic authorities, creating that regional layer of government that will be responsible for economic growth and transport. It's about simplifying structures. So we talked about district and councils, those two tiers of government. It's about reducing that to a single unitary council layer. How will it change the sector? I think this slide is really helpful, just showing the scale. So Rebekah said we've got 317 councils. There are 21 areas going through LGR, and that equates to nearly 200 councils. When we go through and finish, when we come out the other side of LGR, the number will be somewhere between 155 and 181 councils remaining. And it's a really interesting jigsaw puzzle, because as we change, it's like a jigsaw puzzle where we have to take apart councils and put them back together. And so I think, and for the 5 areas that we've had decisions on so far, there is a lot of disaggregation, taking things apart in that, which we've not seen on the scale that we've had previously. So there is also a challenge that in the 5 areas that have been announced, they're creating councils through bits of councils. So you'll have a brand new council that has never, it's never existed as one being before. And so that means there might be little corporate memory, there might be limited data for decision making, and it's actually much more complex in terms of how you deal with the, changing, merging and disaggregating all their kind of infrastructure and systems. So in terms of when it's happening, Surrey are an early adopter. They're actually going to go live on the 1st of April next year. Day one is non-negotiable. You have to kind of hit that day one. And then the rest of councils will go live on the 1st of April 2028. So we've got sort of nearly 2 years to help go through the transition. But day one is just the beginning, because we know from the councils that have gone through LGR that this process takes years. It's a large change program, and you can only do certain activities once you get to the other side of becoming a new unitary authority. It takes time to merge all those hundreds of systems that I talked about, or take them apart and put them into the right new council. So generally, you're looking at from now to 7 years before a council is kind of stabilised. And we spoke to councils to kind of capture some of the learning that, for those councils that have already gone through LGR. And what was really interesting is we heard the challenges that they experience are the same challenges that we heard through the state of digital local government. They're just kind of compounded because you only have this kind of window of opportunity as you go through reorganisation. But there are some things that you have that, are real challenges as we go through it, like the emotional impact for people going through it when you don't know if you're going to have a job, who your manager is going to be, how your job is going to change for like 2 to 3 years as you go through this process. Managing all those systems and the contracts that sit behind them and how you disaggregate them, and the liaison that's required with suppliers to do that. And as I said, how we kind of take those systems apart and put them back together. So it's an actual huge undertaking, but there are opportunities, because if you're creating a brand new organisation, you're creating new strategy, new structures, new governance, and those are the historical barriers that we know through the work that we do, are a barrier to digital transformation. So this is my last slide, and that is really why it's so kind of LGR is so significant. We are in this kind of really uncertain and complex world at the moment, and the pace of change means that we need approaches that provide agility and flexibility and resilience in organizations. We are seeing a fundamental shift in technology advancement, whether that's AI, quantum computing or robotics, and we do need to be designing digital AI enabled organizations. We want to be able to use our data to intervene early based on what we know about people. And to do that, we need to change the way that we architect our IT solutions. And traditionally, councils have worked in verticals responding to central government policy, whether that's been planning or housing or social care, and that's created silo thinking in councils. And we need to shift from that to this kind of connected ecosystem using data and platforms and reusable components to help us. So LGR creates this urgency to try and tackle those things due to the scale of change that we're seeing. 200 councils, 21 areas, all going through this. It's huge. It's, it takes a lot to make it happen. And as you're going through it, you're trying to all the time balance like the reality of today and the practical things that you need to do to get to day one, along with actually making sure that you're putting in place the conditions to be able to, create the future of that new unitary. So years of energy and effort will go into reorganisation without a doubt. And so it's essential then that we create these new unitaries that are positioned for the future.
Thank you. Okay, so just building on that story of kind of change and what the future holds, and this being a kind of opportunity to rethink about the local state and the sort of local landscape. The LGA from September sort of stood up a programme called Local Government Horizons, which is essentially pulling together our kind of energies and different disciplines across the organisation to think about how we can support councils to do that kind of long-term thinking, planning and acting with the future in mind. So a couple of things that kind of were the sort of impetus for this work. One was because we're a membership organisation, we respond to what our members ask for, and the lived reality is definitely that kind of operational strains that we've heard about is crowding out long-term change. So all the short-term crisis, statutory pressures, incremental fixes that need to happen, but there are legacy processes that underlie those, sit underneath those, and then not kind of having this kind of space for this sort of shared language about how we do that kind of future-focused decision making. Essentially, councils are highly adaptive in a crisis for sure, but there are structural constraints about kind of preparing for the future, and this seems like an opportunity to think about those, how we do that. Lots of external pressures too. This pulls in different directions. There's certainly a kind of political movement around sort of nostalgia for a golden age of public services where, everything was very straightforward and the population was less complex, and can we go back to that era, and all, if it ever existed, and also kind of on the opposite extreme, kind of rapid social and technological change, rising expectations. So lots of these kind of external kind of macro pressures to sit beside those sort of micro realities as well. So the sort of approach that we've taken to this is to think about how we can provide our support. So what can we do, bearing in mind our goals around advocacy, improvement and innovation. So supporting that kind of national thinking on long-term future of local government, supporting councils with preparedness and resilience for the long term, more kind of blue skies thinking about imaginative futures, what kind of alternative futures would be a reasonable kind of pathway, and then also supporting where there needs extra help on that kind of capability building, so that we can kind of build a good community of people who are interested in doing that kind of futures thinking. Whoops, am I going? Yes, no, that's right. So on that one around sort of more kind of blue skies thinking, we've come up with a project called LG 2040, the state of things to come, which is really about a big kind of research and engagement project focused on that long-term system level future of local government. Why do we pick this time period? I mean, I guess you could pick any sort of time period, but we've gone with this one particularly because we think it's sort of far enough away where you can kind of start thinking beyond those kind of incremental changes. So if you're kind of thinking about a kind of a three horizons framework, we're definitely in the kind of third horizon, but also close enough to actually think, how can we sort of start backcasting from that? How can we start thinking about the practical steps that we can take now? Aligned to sort of broader investment cycles, particularly think about councils' local planning, which tends to work on a sort of 15-year cycle. And we know that this is, if you're thinking generationally, this seems like a good point in the horizon to pick. This also feeds into public service reform, increasingly being of interest across central government. Lots of conversations about how the state shows up, how it cares, what does it care about, how does it anticipate change, how do we make change happen through experimentation and kind of rethinking what those system constraints might be. feel like a bit of a fraud from this bit because I'm not actually doing the research and I'm speaking on behalf of our partner, School of International Futures, who I know have been at one of these sessions before. So I'll try and do a good job of what their methodology is and what's coming out of it. But essentially, we sort of set this question, which was what forces actually are likely to shape local government in the run-up now until 2040. And the things we're particularly interested in are what might those most significant pressures be and where might those disruptions start to emerge and what does all that mean for local government. But we've done that sort of exercise before and that was all kind of fine and we kind of got a good idea of kind of what might be coming down the track. But it's not just about risk, it's how we respond constructively and how we start coming up with kind of hopeful ideas about actually kind of trying to change the general trajectory, I guess. So the methodology for this, of which we're in the sort of third stage of this now. So we've done a sort of horizon scan, which is essentially thinking about those drivers of change, came up with about 40 or 50. They're the different scale, they're sort of macro and micro drivers, they're kind of emerging signals, and some of those deeper kind of underlying causes that might shape the system. We then held some workshops, and so we started to try to sort of prioritise what those drivers might be, looking at what the scale of those impacts would be and what the nature would be, how disruptive are they really going to be, and sort of, importantly, what new opportunities that might they open up. The next stage that we're about to go into is the landscape testing. So we're actually thinking, how do they play out in different parts of the country? Do they all mean the same sort of things across various regions and in local areas? So essentially, kind of, which drivers really are genuinely going to reshape the system? How might they amplify or weaken things or expose things? Where might we see more friction? What dependencies become more critical? And essentially, what becomes harder? What becomes completely irrelevant? And what becomes newly possible? And then kind of what we're building up to is a kind of narrative around hopeful futures. We know that there won't be one single future that everyone can agree in, particularly when you work in a cross-party organisation. But there are certainly sort of different tracks that we can go down. Essentially, a sort of deliberate shift away from thinking about not just doing that risk analysis, but actually start thinking about, well, what do we really value? Where do we have agency to make change? And what are those sort of possible possibilities as well? Essentially, it's hope becomes something that we can practice and it's not just something that we can kind of think about. Yes, so this was just a part of the exercise that we got participants to take part in order to think about what the drivers might be, which essentially doing some kind of looking back over the last 30 years, what's changed and what's been important, and also kind of getting people's opinions about where we go next. And we kind of put that together with some broader literature review and sort of data, metrics, etc. And then in terms of where we are on the drivers, where we did the drivers prioritization, these are the things that kind of came up from those workshops. So essentially, things that are emerging. So where do we think that there are things that we need to be aware of, but are still contested? We're still trying to work out what these things might mean. The second bucket is there's a lot more in there, which is essentially like we've got some coherence around these ideas, but they're still a little bit out of the mainstream. And then things that are like we definitely know what we're going to have to respond to. So that was just the things that our groups prioritized. And the way in which we're trying to think about this is, okay, so if we know all those things are going to be coming down the track, how do we enable change? And we thought we might do this through this sort of four M's framework, which is to think about some of these are going to take a mandate change. They're going to take a change in the sort of formal powers and responsibilities of councils. There's also things that are more to do with the models. So kind of what governance sits over this? How does it affect service delivery? How does it affect how organisations and systems work? Some of this is about mindsets. It's about actually the culture and kind of what are the kind of beliefs and norms and assumptions that influence all of this. And some of it's more about the more mechanistic, essentially the tools and processes, etc. So these are the sorts of kind of things that we're thinking about. From those drivers, we are now getting to the point where we can start to have a conversation about what those things might look like if we know we've got to be more climate resilient, if we know that we've got a job to do in kind of adult social care market shaping. What does that mean for our statutory responsibilities and funding? What kind of conversations do we need to have, and so forth and so forth. So that's kind of the model that we're using, and seems to be a good process. Seems to be working well. In opening up those conversations and actually thinking about how we test our assumptions. We've got a couple more kind of elements to this which we think we're going to get into. They're still pending, but we're really going to be thinking about that kind of what is the identity of councils going forward, how do we enable transformation, and also a wider public engagement piece about kind of what does that relationship between local, state and citizens look like. And I think there's just a couple of ways in which you connect with us. Don't know how we're doing for time, but good. Okay.
Brilliant. Well, Rebekah, Lisa, thank you very much indeed. We've got time for a very quick round of questions. Remember, we're on the record. Do tell us who you are and where you're from if you can. I'll try and squeeze in a few quick questions if you keep them nice and short. I can see a hand over there, and we've got one there as well. So I'll take those 2 questions.
Thank you very much. Lisa, you said that scaling innovation across the sector is challenging. Do you have an example of where it's worked and why? Oh, and I'm James Cattell.
I'll take the other one as well, quickly.
Yeah, that was actually my question. Like, you mentioned the examples of the early adopters. Are you seeing like the main themes from where there could be real opportunities? Thanks. I'm sorry, Adam Watkin, Department for Business and Trade.
And I think, I think that's why that was a challenge that was put, that we picked up in the State of Digital Government, because there is lots of kind of really exciting things happening, but they're in pockets. So I think probably the Minute Pilot was the first one that we started to kind of intervene in and work with central government in order to think about how could we scale this. So we had picked up, because we were working with councils through our AI network, that lots of councils were doing individual good things, but how could we do this at a larger scale? The Minute Pilot has concluded, but we haven't kind of taken, we're just working now to take forward the next steps with that. So, but yeah, that's the challenge, and that's what we need to continue to work on and work collaboratively with central government on that.
Right. Any other quick ones? I'll take last question.
Hi, I'm David Durant. I'm one of the organisers. I worked in local government for a long time. The biggest blocker to transformation and getting away from the cartel of current suppliers tends to be councillors and really senior people in the organisation. Because of everything being on fire, they are very risk averse. Do you have any specific work streams in this that target senior decision makers to say, oh, let's just not go back to Capita again because it's the easiest thing to do?
Yes. I was going to say, we've done a lot of specific councillor training around digital in the past, and trying to kind of explain what that really means. And I think it's something we've talked about under the 2040 programme as well, and how we kind of pick that back up and do that again.
Yeah, I think there is, so essentially we are an organisation that kind of provides advice and does that for political leaders too. Some of it, we've done a lot of work around sort of, I mean, it sounds really boring, but kind of business cases, how you actually make the argument and how you do that kind of convincing. A lot of it doesn't necessarily need to be about return on investment, but a lot of it is. So just trying to make that a little bit easier by sharing learning. There's not necessarily, if you've made the argument once, you may be able to make it again somewhere else. So I think it's just trying to share that practice where we've had wins and where that case has been made. So just trying to make that more available so it's a bit more off the shelf. I mean, it always needs sort of tailoring to particular environments and particular kind of blockers that you might have. But no, that's a type of work that we tend to do. Seems a bit mundane, but it can have an impact. Yeah.
Well, Rebekah, Lisa, thank you very much indeed. So I will shortly, once I've fiddled around with the screens a little bit, and I will stop screen sharing online. So I'm delighted to welcome our third speaker, but second segment tonight, and that's Jonathan. Welcome.
Hi, I worked here about 15 years ago. After I started in local government, I worked in Newham and Islington councils in the 90s, joined the civil service in 2001, Director General for Transforming Justice from 2008 to 2011, from which I went to be Director General for Transforming Defence from 2011 to 2015, at which point I decided that one self-evident point is never, ever have the word transformation in your job title. You are bound to disappoint. If you can make things a little bit better by the time you left than when you started, that's not bad. Anyway, it's nice to be back. Seamlessly moving from local government reform to civil service reform. Hang on a minute. Local government reform to, surely central government reform? Why isn't it called central government reform? Why is it civil service reform? What's the difference between the two? Well, I suppose central government reform would mean the whole thing. That would include the politicians we just heard about. And why wouldn't it? Well, there are a couple of possible reasons. One is that the nature of the political class in central government is not capable of reform, is as good as it gets. That's one possibility. Anybody want to argue that? I'm not making a point about the moment. I'm not Christian Turner in your presence. This is a point you could have made at any point, well, certainly in the last 20 years. So it's not, is it, because the political class isn't capable of reform or doesn't need it at all? I mean, the capability challenges are obvious. And as I say, this is not a sort of new problem. Neither is it the case that the public is sort of happy with the sort of politicians who they elect. So it's not for the reason it doesn't require reform. I guess the sort of more straightforward reason would be that the people who sort of decide to reform things tend to decide to reform other people. I mean, I suppose that would be a sort of logical reason. Central government thinks it's a really good idea to turn Surrey County Council and 11 districts into 2 unitaries, and they may be right, but they're sort of reforming somebody else, aren't they? As I made the switch from local to central government, I was struck by the way that the best councils, and this is a long time ago, as I say, around 2000, were really sort of experimenting with some, really sort of comprehensive analysis of the disconnect, if there was one, between the council and the public, and how to centre the services they provided around their customers. I mean, obviously there were lots of councils that weren't doing a very good job of that at all, but there's some really sort of interesting innovations going on. When I was at Islington, they had 24 neighbourhood forums in which local people were elected as the street rep coming along to sort of hold the councillors to account. I was asked in the mid-90s to design a citizens' jury to invite members of the public to work out how to prioritise library services. And I thought, they're not going to do it. It's not fair to ask 12 randomly selected members of the public which library services you're not going to prioritise. They're going to say that's the job of the councillors. But no, they really engaged. It was really impressive. They said, well, we're going to prioritise the young over the old. That's what they came up with. It was more sophisticated than that. I was a little bit disappointed but I learned something about the nature of local democracy, where the councillors decided, having received that report, that it turned out to be the older ones that voted rather more than the younger ones, and they weren't going to prioritise that. But my point is that there was sort of interesting stuff going on in places like Islington, in Kirklees, in Wigan, lots of places a long time ago, really trying to grapple with some stuff that's, harder now than it was then. The level of sort of disengagement between the public and politicians, requires that, but in spades, doesn't it? It really, really does. So I'm, interested in central government reform in the round rather than civil service reform in particular. In which I think exploring the question of how the public might feel more sort of ownership, more connection, more engagement in the political process would be a debate really well worth having. And we're sort of running out of time, aren't we? We're really running out of time. But as I sort of considered the difference between local government and central government, I was struck by a lesson that I thought central government, the civil service, could learn from local government. Again, I'm going back 20 years, lots changed in the last 20 years. Ironically, at the time I became a civil servant, central government was imposing its own model of how to organise decision-making upon local government, which I thought was exactly the wrong way around. Exactly the wrong way around. By which I mean this. When I was a Director of Education at Islington Council, just as today, the number of primary school children was falling. And so we couldn't afford to keep all the primary schools open, just as in around the country. And so it's my job as the Director of Education to make a recommendation to the councillors about which primary school to close, a not uncontroversial decision. And so I sort of considered that and did some consultation and made a recommendation in public at a meeting of the committee, of the Education Committee, explaining why I was proposing X over Y. And I didn't think twice about it. Neither did I think twice about it when I went along to the Angel Primary School to explain to the parents and the pupils and the teachers why I was recommending closing their school. It was a meeting with a certain amount of latent hostility. It's a meeting I'm not going to remember. I'm not going to forget in a hurry, ever. But again, I didn't think twice about it. Obviously, I was explaining to the people who were on the receiving end of the recommendation I was making why I was recommending it. Why I was recommending it, I was alongside the chair of the committee, who's accountable for the decision, but I'm accountable for the recommendation, aren't I? Obviously, they're paying my wages. What's to think about? Until you arrive in the civil service, where you sort of imagine it's going to be the same, it's just bigger, more complicated. After all, I used to work for Margaret Hodge, Meg Hillier, Stephen Twigg, James Pennell, and now I found myself working for literally the same people 3 miles away as ministers, but it couldn't be more different. If you want to know what I advised out anything, you've got to wait 20 years. And it might be redacted. And so I sort of asked around, why is it that way then? Why is the advice that we make to our politicians like secret? Why is it done behind closed doors? To which the answer I was given was because it has to be. Except it isn't. Yeah, I was an impartial official advising elected politicians of different political parties over different times in public. So it really doesn't have to be done that way at all. And there are consequences for doing it this way. I mean, there really are. There's a sort of truism, isn't there? We all know that the civil service isn't very, in Whitehall, very sort of delivery focused. There's a sort of lack of accountability, a risk aversion. We all know this. They make you, as you've seen on the slide, a visiting professor at King's College if you're no longer a permanent secretary. A tip for any of you who want to become permanent secretaries. I said to them, well, I don't really have any academic prowess. They said, no, it doesn't matter. It's just the seniority of your previous job. Okay then. And so King's won the contract in the Cabinet Office for training fast streamers. So this year and last year, all the policy fast streamers are lucky enough to have an hour from me. And I start the session by saying to them, you've been civil servants for 6 months, right? I bet you've spotted some things that are a bit weird about it. Let's have a conversation about what you think is weird about the civil service. Now write it down, right? The last session I did last month, these are people who've been civil servants for 6 months. They say, oh, Jonathan, it's so process focused rather than outcomes. The IT and across the different departments, they don't talk to each other. You seem to get promoted in the civil service, not for what you achieve, but how well you talk. Anybody recognize any of this, right? So these are not new thoughts. They're not new thoughts. Essentially, you could read the same in the 1960s under Fulton. You could read the same thing in the Haldane in about 1918. It doesn't change. The interesting question is, why doesn't it change? Why are civil servants not sort of imbued with a responsibility for outcomes? Why do they find themselves spending so much time writing stuff, briefings for ministers to go to cross-departmental meetings to explain why the answer is no? And the answer is not because that's the sort of people that get recruited into the civil service. I just told you about a random group of 40 people. That's what they think. They've only been there 6 months. Not because of who the civil service recruits or what they want to achieve, but because, of course, as we know, culture is more important and it sort of takes over. And what drives the culture? Well, it's complicated, isn't it? And I haven't got much time, but I'm going to suggest it wouldn't be surprising if the answer's got something to do with the fact we operate in secret. How accountable do you think I felt for explaining to the Education Committee that I was proposing to close Angel Primary School? Extremely accountable. Why did I feel accountable for that? Because I was in front of the parents explaining it to them. Why did I have to make sure? Anybody got a glass of water? Or you got any water in there? So obviously that meeting's having some adverse impact on me. why did I need to make sure that that advice I was giving to the council was really well informed? Thank you very much. Cheers, mate. Really well informed, right? Why did I need to make sure it was really informed by the evidence? Why did I have to spend as much time on that question as what would the politician want me to say? Because it was in public. You couldn't get away with it, yeah? Obviously, if I'm going to be advised in the Education Committee, I'm thinking about what the Education Committee wants. I'm thinking about the politicians. Obviously, I'm doing that. I'm working for them. It's democracy. That's a good thing. But in the civil service, that could be the only thing, right? Because the only people in the room are you and them. Open it up. Open it up. I bet you get a lot more of an accountable system than that. You might even, going back to where I started, get a little bit of trust. Maybe the public might think, oh, these people, we sort of see what they're up to. Oh, it's, maybe, I mean, this may be sort of madness. And, you know, clearly some councils do this and did this a lot better than other councils. But I do think that opening things up would be good for us, be good for the politicians, and it would be good for the public. Gavin started with a joke about vetting. It's sort of obvious, isn't it, in the last week or so, that a group of MPs on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee have learned a lot. They've learned a lot about how government works. You know, Emily Thornberry's quite an experienced politician. She's learned a lot about how government works. The public's learned quite a bit about it, actually, as well, haven't they? I mean, there's a sort of political game going on, but has stuff got learned about how the system actually works? Yeah. I think it's all the better for it. I think it's all the better for it. And that is all I've got to say.
We've got time for questions. I've got a hand over there, I've got a hand over there, and I've got a hand over there. I will take you three first in a round. Just wait for me to come with the mic.
Thanks for that. My name's Isabel Egan-Carter, and this kind of can link to a lot of things that you said, so I'll keep it broad. But over the course of your career, how do you see the role of the media having an effect on that trusting relationship between the public and the various levels of government? And does it vary based on which level of government we're talking about?
Do you want to do them one at a time or in a group?
What would you rather?
Well, let's take them in a group, see what's...
A really interesting presentation. Thank you, Jonathan. Fabian Cheswell from Policy and Practice, and I want to link the two talks. We heard earlier about how it can be difficult to scale innovation, but we work with 120 councils. You look at companies like Beam, who've also been able to scale innovations across councils. And what distinguishes what we can do and what we can't is where the council is empowered to make a decision versus has to go through a huge amount of red tape and hoops and coordination with other bodies. So you talked a lot about imposition and central government impositions on local government. And I wonder if you can expand a bit on that and how you see that harming council's ability to innovate.
Yeah.
Thanks. I suppose my question is around what you think is really stopping civil service or central government reform. We've had, so many diagnoses of the issues and a lot of proposals for how it could be reformed. I think the civil service are up for it. I think the public seem to be up for it, which leads me to think that the answer, it's into Antonia's objectives as cabinet secretary, which leads me to think that it lies with the politicians and someone having the vision to really drive that reform. And yeah, keen to get your thoughts on that.
Okay. I know the least about the media one, so I will do my best, but I'll do it in reverse order. So why doesn't it happen? Now, politicians are in charge, as they should be, because it wouldn't be a democracy if they weren't. And this is an obvious point. Politicians generally don't, in opposition, think about reforming the civil service because they're more concerned about schools and hospitals, and they understand that better, and they don't understand anything about the civil service. Why don't they understand anything about the civil service? Because it's in secret. It's not like that again in local government. When I was and again, it might be different now, but in the 90s when I was at Islington, I was working for the council, and therefore I had to engage with opposition politicians, and I had to explain to the leader of the opposition what I was doing from time to time. And so the opposition did understand what the council officials did, and were much better prepared when they took over. Here we make it as difficult as we possibly can, don't we, for an incoming government. They know nothing about it until sort of a few months before they're out of a few meetings with a few permanent secretaries. So they don't understand how important it is until it's too late. They're running the country and etc., etc. And clearly it would be good if opposition parties spent more time, preparing for government. It's not completely impossible that the current government might think, upon reflection, it would have been better to have spent a little bit more time preparing. But you can see why they don't. And this isn't the first one that's not really, because, they sort of focus a lot on winning, which is sort of understandable, isn't it? So the drive tends not to come from them. Now, you say civil servants are up for it, and that's certainly true of the fast streamers I was talking to last month. And I know Antonia well, and she's got a load of oomph too, absolutely. So this is definitely not a point about Antonia or about any named individual. That wouldn't be fair, would it? But in general, and this would not be just exclusively true of the civil service, how likely is the energy for reform to an institution that's been going for about 180 years to come from the people who've got to the top of the system by demonstrating the behaviours that get them there? If the fast streamers are right, and you get promoted more for how well you talk than what you've achieved. I remember a director of children's services in Manchester, I'm going to work for me in the Department of Education. He said, how come people apply for a new job every 12 months, 18 months? What could they possibly have achieved in 18 months? And of course, he was right. He's coming from outside. This is weird. Yeah? So how likely would it be that people who've got to the top by demonstrating their ability to manage upwards, remember what I said, that this is not a comment about any individual at all, rather than outwards, how likely is it that that group of people would say, I'll tell you what's wrong with the civil service, we spend too much time managing upwards? So is it likely that the sort of energy for reform is going to come from the top of the civil service without an external drive? Not that likely. The larger major reform of the civil service, not of Whitehall, but of the civil service, was under Margaret Thatcher, the sort of next step agencies thing that created the prison service and things like that. That was imposed, by a politician with a group of people who drove it through. I think that's more likely to happen, but not at all likely in circumstances where politicians focus elsewhere. So I think the time it would happen was when, and you do see this, and I've given Margaret Thatcher an example, when politicians in advance think about the machine they're going to inherit and do some proper analysis and preferably talk to me about what is wrong with it. Yeah. Everybody agrees with the sort of diagnosis. I don't think you're going to find another permanent secretary who thinks, ex-permanent secretary thinks the answer is to open it up. And that could be because I'm wrong. But people disagree about the how, which I guess is another reason why it doesn't happen. Why does central government impose so much on local government, was the second question. And the answer, I think, is because it can. When Margaret was the leader of Islington Council, she didn't like central government telling her what to do. And then she became, this isn't supposed to be about individuals, is it? And then when you become a minister, you become a minister for a reason. You become a minister to make a difference. In fact, the same is true for us as civil servants, isn't it? Those of us in the room are civil servants. Why did you become a civil servant? To make a difference. And so I would go along to talk to policymakers in the Department for Education as a sort of new permanent secretary, and I would say, quite often just not doing anything, leaving teachers and social workers to get on with it. Do you know what? It might be better than the alternative. How sure are we that we know better than them how to do their jobs? And although they would know that I was right, and I speak with a certain amount of authority. No. There's a sort of, again, it's sort of instinctive. If you're there, you want to have something to do, don't you? And then, of course, there is something about the civil service which is a bit elitist, of course, isn't it? Those fast streamers, they may be more diverse in a way, but how many of them have been to FE college? And so when I arrived from Islington in 2001, I mean, I'm white, I'm middle class. I grew up in Surrey. I went to grammar school. I went to a Russell Group University, and guess how people made me think? He's a bit of a funny bloke. Didn't go to Oxford. Doesn't speak Latin. And things have moved on, obviously, in the last 20 years. But even so, you read that there's a great publication by the Social Mobility Foundation about the civil service. I mean, it's 10 years out of date. The fast stream, less diverse than the typical Oxford college, was their conclusion. Got less diverse over the last 40 years, was their conclusion. And so there is a sort of notion that we're better than them. And I mean, I would go along to meetings as a sort of new civil servant with Howard Bernstein, from Manchester Council. Manchester Council was really pretty impressive, and you should hear the way the 25-year-old young guys from the Treasury would talk to him. God almighty. So a combination of, we're in charge, we want to be busy, so let's impose a burden, combined with a sort of elitist thing. I don't know if that was the sort of answer anyway, it's what I've got. And then, sure, of course, absolutely. There are people much more expert than I am on how the media in general and social media in particular, how that has transformed the nature of politics. And if I were to compare now with 20 years ago, so you're asking me to do that, I think, then obviously, newspapers and broadcast media matter much less, and YouTube and TikTok matter much more. And the reason that politicians have been having this debate about whether to ban them for kids is because of the sort of the risks and the echo chamber and all the rest of it. And that is, that's hard stuff, isn't it? The extent to which we find ourselves just having conversations with people like us, and social media platforms run by people like Elon Musk are designed with algorithms to make us angrier and angrier and angrier. Again, it's not my area of expertise, as you can probably tell, but there's something there, isn't there? And that makes the job of a politician harder. And I would say makes the case for a focus on the engagement or lack of it between the public and the politicians, like the number one question. The number one question. Not, despite what I said about it, who gets recruited to which jobs in the civil service. I mean, that is a problem. But the number one issue is how to sort of connect the public with the political process. And isn't it a shame? That's not the conversation.
Thanks. I'm going to squeeze one question in from online while I do some technical jiggery-pokery on this. Will asks, what do you think happened to mission-based government?
So when I arrived in the civil service, as I say, in 2001, I was working in number 10. Tony Blair was the Prime Minister before the Iraq War. Every month, he's been getting more popular. It's amazing. And the people around him were Jonathan Powell, Jeff Mulgan, Michael Barber, Sally Morgan, Angie Hunter, a group of, and so on and so on, a group of really very impressive people. It was a bit scary being in rooms with them. They were so clever. And then I thought, no, obviously, they're running the country, so you're going to have the cleverest people around in the centre, obviously, a really significant group of, and then I discovered over time that no, actually, this was an outlier. It was an exception. Incredible, isn't it? But there it is. One of those people was a guy who wrote the Prime Minister's speeches. He was Peter Hyman. And after writing the Prime Minister's speeches for quite a long time, he went to run a school, well, to be a teacher and then run a school. And then Keir Starmer brought him back into helping the Labour Party prepare for government. And there was a sort of lack of a vision thing, the point people were making about the Labour Party preparing for government. And shortly after Peter arrived, the Prime Minister-to-be, Keir Starmer, the leader of the opposition, gave a speech about missions, which I thought was good. I thought it was a good speech. And I could see what a difference Peter was making already. And Peter isn't working for the government anymore. And it's not doing missions.
Jonathan, thank you very much indeed. I'm not going to detain you from the pizza/pub for too long. You may already have started the pizza and the pub if you're watching us online, but some quick parish notices. Some of us involved in TransformGov talks and various people from civil service are thinking of an unconference for policy people called Policy Camp. Go to policycamp.org.uk to find out more information. All of these links will be shared on the blog post after this event and via email as well. National Conversations, that's Transform Wales and Foundations of the Digital State in Scotland working together. Do check out their website as well. I mentioned Derek was swanning around the world looking at civil service and public sector reform earlier. You can follow his progress at Civic Punks. A few things I'm involved in. I host an event series called Data Bites. There's some news to come on that shortly, but you can sign up for updates on the Public Digital website. I also help host Think Digital conferences. We've got a couple of those coming up. If you're public sector, they are free to attend. And I'm currently doing some work with Kinship Works to map public sector reform, people who are interested in that, but also some work around civic renewal as well. Who's doing interesting work in communities? Yes, you can.
Hello, I'm just going to jump in very quickly and do one that's not on the parish notice list. Before I go on from what Jonathan was saying about government working directly with the public, I just want to give a plug to National Strategy Project. So if you go to nationalstrategy.uk, really big project on deliberation with the public that's building up at the moment, looking for people who want to get involved. Please go and have a look. Thank you.
And Catherine Day, who's leading that, spoke at previous TransformGov talks as well, so you can check out the recording of that. A reminder that the next TransformGov Talks event, hosted by Public Digital, will be happening on Thursday, the 21st of May. What day is it not?
Wednesday.
What day is it?
Thursday.
Good. Where is it not? Oh. Where is it? Well done. Expect to see all of you there or tuning in online. Again, if you'd like to help us organise, if you'd like to speak or know someone that should, or if you'd like to give us some money that would keep us in free pizza, you can email transformgovtalks@gmail.com or come and speak to one of us afterwards. You can also help us out by telling someone how much you enjoyed tonight. Maybe think about one insight that you took away, a big takeaway, an action something you might do differently, anything that came to mind. Tell someone how much you enjoyed it and what you're going to do differently, and encourage them to sign up. You can sign up to the newsletter at transformgov.org.uk. All that remains for me to say, 3 very big thank yous. First of all, to all of our sponsors. Second, to all of you for coming tonight, and those of you joining us online as well. And please join me in a huge round of applause for our brilliant speakers tonight, Lisa, Rebecca, and Jonathan. Thank you very much indeed. And for those of you in the room, I think pizza might have appeared magically just outside the door. Please do help yourselves. And thank you very much. Very much indeed. Great, thank you.